All right, welcome to ATW Live Monday night. I'm Matt Taibbi.
And I'm Walter Kern.
Walter, I'm at a loss this week. You're going to have to carry the rock this week. I know that. I got nothing insight-wise. I'm overwhelmed. I'm gaslit to the extreme. I need your insight this week.
Overwhelming the likes of Matt Taibbi and everybody else in America is exactly what the game is now. We would be overwhelmed if we were paying attention to the real news, regime change in Syria, the coming of the Trump administration, the pardons that are on the table.
Canceling an election over TikTok.
Romania canceling an election over TikTok. But, okay, there's one of your clues right there, Matt. Who is more powerful in the Romania election? The people or TikTok? Well, TikTok as a scapegoat was more powerful than the people themselves, meaning that the secondary or tertiary or quaternary layer of reality expressed through social media is now in the driver's seat. That's what wag the dog means. It means, the part that's supposed to be at the back is now at the front. And now reality is social media plus events, quote unquote, which can be scripted, which can be performed in a way that makes the social media response predictable. That it's dinner theater murder mystery time in terms of this UHC killing. Then we've got the drone War of the Worlds reprise going on in New Jersey. And that's a separate matter. It works a little differently. But my thesis is simply this. They're both games. Now, the first true crime game, which was supposedly perpetrated by a guy who's turned out to be a gamer, okay? A guy who's interested in AI, a guy who, admired the Unabomber, which I knew. Well, I already knew.
Who doesn't admire the Unabomber a little bit? I'm kidding.
Well, yeah. Well, Matt, I was onto this thing from the day it started, and I recommend that everyone go to my Twitter feed because I've made absolutely brilliant and perfect predictions about how this thing would play out. Why? Because anybody who's written TV or written drama and also knows something about how information proliferates through our media system now can script one of these. Dude, you give me one free murder and I'll have the nation obsessing. Okay.
Right.
You might have to commit the murder, but I'll set up the manifesto. I'll set up the
social media response.
But that will all depend on the scripting of the original thing. And we've got America right now, like going down rabbit holes at a rate you've never seen.
Yeah. Okay. I get all that, but we accustomed ourselves. We had to learn how to read the news backwards to forwards, as you say, like, tail wagging the dog, narrative first, facts second. That was the whole training session of the, it's like the, when you learn to play a video game, they have like a tutorial, in the beginning where you hit forehands and backhands for a while. That's what the last 8 years was with this method of news. But now I can't even follow the meta narratives or what I'm supposed to be understanding now. I'm in Morris County, New Jersey. There's like UAPs flying over my house. There are people chasing drones all over this county, night after night, weeks on end. Elected officials are waiting out there saying, "How come we don't have any answers?" The Department of Homeland Security has apparently met with the governor, and they're not saying anything. And this is a story that should be on the front page of every major newspaper in the country, and it's not. Meanwhile, everybody in the world's focused on that murder that you're talking about. But we've also had regime change in Syria, like sort of parenthetically take place, and they canceled an election in Romania that a decision we recognized. I just can't keep up with all this shit. I can't.
Let me simplify it all for you. Everyone who, was at all realistic and sophisticated knew that when Donald Trump was elected, there would be a response. This is the response. It doesn't look like what you anticipated. Maybe you thought there would be riots. Maybe you thought there would be, street action, George Floyd style, that kind of thing. No, there was a much more sophisticated response prepared, and this is it right now. The timing is everything. You got to think like a homicide detective. You got to think about opportunity, motive, means, and so on. Well, motive. Take everybody and direct their attention at a time when you're about to be exposed. Let's say you're the deep state. Let's just use that as a signifier. You don't want your operations abroad, your failures, the exposure that's coming from this new administration, any of that. You don't want any of that taking up a big piece of the attention pie. And listen, it's a finite pie. We all have 24 hours, 8 of them are sleeping, 16 are spent, conscious, and so much data can fit into those. And you want to take as much of it over to your side. More than that, you're a political actor, a social actor, and so you want it to mean something. You want it to have a moral. You want it to hurt your enemies and help your friends. Now, that will explain 3/4, 90% of the United Healthcare thing. It was set up as a Robin Hood story. At the most basic level, the technical level, the murder was committed on camera, as anyone who knows about Manhattan surveillance would anticipate it would be. There was a manifesto in place to be found. They got
cinematic detail with the bullet casing.
Yeah, and they did, and they left it, but so the guy in the video does all kinds of things that got everybody speculating. Is he a professional? Is he an amateur? What kind of gun is it? Was he making mistakes? Everything that happened in that video was something you were meant to see. That's my hypothesis, okay? Everything that's on that guy's computer, you were meant to find. That's my hypothesis. Everything about his biography, especially recently, that you could sort of set up, was set up. The breakdown, whatever it is. I'm not following it that closely anymore because I saw the pilot. I don't have to see every episode of the series.
Right.
I'll wait till the conclusion. But I can promise you what the conclusion will be is something that helps move against Trump, something that moves against populism, something that moves against RFK, something that
or creates a competing strain.
Well, see, in some ways, these things don't have to have a point. The point is that they take our attention away. The point is that the scripts are known to some and not to most, which means there's an order to things that you can kind of trade on. You can do insider trading if you know the script. And by that, I mean not stock trading, but sort of general trading. Anytime there's a system or order that develops, it can be exploited by those who can, either divine the order, figure it out, or have put it there in the first place. So that's what's going on. Absolutely. I mean, and everyone has had an uncanny sense from the beginning that the thing was fake in some way, because Matt, people have to stop thinking in the old binaries, as they say, reality versus media, facts versus fictions about facts. They're all the same thing. They really are the same thing, but they've got everybody digging and paying detective. And while they're doing that, ideas are being implanted in their head, ideas about fairness in society, about healthcare, about
well, that I totally agree with, like, because this is the whole nudge technology concept, right? You start talking about sunshine, makes people want to go outside during the pandemic. If you start talking about what do health insurance companies really do, it arouses your sense of injustice, right? I mean, it's but I can see that.
A very smart kid who's into gaming and is a programmer and into AI and who could really design an AI crime. In other words, he could figure out what made the Unabomber story attractive and what elements can I reuse? What made the JFK mystery so compulsive for people? What makes certain myths like Robin Hood so interesting? And he could literally in a day design a crime. Then he could go do it. Now, it probably, to me, has more to it than that, because we didn't see the guy's face first. We saw a guy in a hoodie, and then we saw someone in what seems to be the same hoodie in another shot later, while flirting with a clerk in a hostel, a detail that we shouldn't have gotten, frankly. It's too much. That's not the kind of thing they release in crimes. We saw the hoodie come down a little bit. This is Hansel and Gretel. Let me make it really basic. We are meant to follow the breadcrumbs, and the breadcrumbs lead to the witch's oven.
The witch's oven being?
The witch's oven being conflict, political division, distrust of our senses, distrust of our media. But I think the most, for me, fascinating element is that this thing is being leveraged to take over the territory of public enemy number one, Elon Musk. In other words, Elon Musk's platform is going to be occupied by an organism called this story. And he won't even be able to turn it off, because so much of the platform and so much of the engagement and the trending stuff will be related to this story. If I want to take over a TV station and I want to do it, or a TV network, and I want to do it legally, and traditionally, I write the show that's such a hit that it has spin-offs, and the spin-offs have spin-offs. And then I go to the network and I say, I want your network.
Right.
I own it now.
Yeah.
That's what this is for X. Okay. And it's what's called an augmented reality game. The concepts behind it are rather familiar to the kind of people who, do this sort of study and research. The kid's capable of designing it himself. But
Walter, could you keep talking to the audience for a second while I do some parenting?
Yeah.
Sorry, hang on a second.
Yeah. So, you don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. I see that on the comments. The big story going right now, the assassination of this healthcare executive, it is my hypothesis, was designed either by the killer himself or by the killer in concert with others, and maybe powerful others.
Sorry about that.
To be an intention-eating, energy-sucking, incredibly distracting game that began in a real-life event and will continue to play itself out in real-life events, but whose major manifestations will occur on social media platforms and others. And the course of the game will inject various ideas, attitudes, fears, anxieties, and emotions into the population who play it. That's what it's about. And in other words, if you can agree with me that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, real ships fired on real ships, okay? But his job was to get us into the Vietnam War.
Right, and the, well, go ahead. Yes,
and the various players in the game, the Tonkin game, were pretty simple: network news, newspapers.
The
Okay,
Pentagon.
Yeah. If you've seen Citizen Kane, you know what I'm talking about at a two-dimensional level. I'm going to I'm going to get us in a war. So just update that. All you have to do is update that to use the various technologies available to us now. They can pull you in ways that they could never pull you in. They can get you to participate and have a kind of stake in it in ways they never could before. And they have to design it in advance. It's open-ended. It can go in lots of directions. It's got a human element, but they design it in advance to anticipate things like major tropes, like the killer's going to have a manifesto, We're gonna find out from his friends that he kind of started going crazy, and so on. And as I say, he could be the author, but even if he's the author of the game, he probably needed accomplices in order to play out the
maybe even
life.
unwitting, right? Or so.
Well,
Okay.
he's probably unwitting to a certain extent. He knows his role, but am I describing a paranoid conspiracy theory?
No,
Come on. I'm describing a scripted reality game that begins in a real murder and maybe moves to a real trial, but which can be programmed because we know all the traditional steps that occur in investigations and so on. And each of them, I submit, is something between planned and guided.
Okay, so I'm not accustomed to thinking about events like this, right? And probably 8 years.
No, we aren't. That's why they can play this.
And I would never. This would have made no sense at all to me until very recently, right? But then we had this major bizarre event in 2016, 2017, where this gigantic news story that's kind of quasi-invented, this Russiagate thing, happens. And more important than the actual things that took place in that story were the kind of literary flourishes that occurred around it. So, for instance, when the P-tape story broke, nobody really focused on whether or not there actually was a P-tape, but there were lots of stories. Like there was a front page story in the New York Times about kind of the history of sexual blackmail in Russia and the former Soviet Union. Like this stuff was sort of teed up and ready to go.
Sure.
If an editor decides to go in this direction and do all the stories, that you can just do these things because they're true. You just kind of push the assignments in that direction. And that was weird enough. We didn't really know that was going on at that time. But then the even weirder incident, I think, was with the summer of George Floyd. Remember, there was, as the Russia story kind of collapsed, there was that leak of the New York Times meeting with the editor where he's saying, we built our whole newsroom around one story, and now we're going to have to move to cover something else. And now we're going to do racism full time. And we have the 1619 project. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. All of a sudden, it's like the media suddenly discovered unfairness in the healthcare system. And suddenly we see stories like this is in the BBC. If we could call it up, there was a headline, killing of insurance CEO reveals simmering anger at U.S. healthcare system. And you could have written this story.
What day? This was 4 days ago.
Yeah, it looks like, right? 2 days ago. But there's variations of this story all over the place on in the actual kind of credentialed media and on social media. It's one or another version of this kind of thing where any editor can just sort of backfill this factual story around a narrative. And as you say, there's no once they decide to go in that direction, they can just kind of endlessly replicate this stuff. And it was striking the instant that this thing happened, that suddenly there was just this massive output of material about this, and you begin to wonder if that's going to be our reality from now on. It's just
it's already been our reality. It already is our reality. Let's reverse engineer some of the big stories of the last few years. How about COVID? It starts with real life videos. It starts with surveillance videos of people just falling over in the streets of China and people in hazmat suits cleaning them up. Okay. It starts with a few warnings from public figures in America. It has to grow. Now, those public figures, it's been revealed, knew more about what was happening, right? Than they let on. Okay. So in the most charitable interpretation,
And by the way, they still haven't told us everything, but we'll get to that.
no. Now, because they knew the truth, they had to lay in red herrings to distract us from it, right? And they did that. And the media proved willing accomplices in that. In fact, eager ones, because they now see their job as creating consensus and maintaining the cognitive infrastructure and so on. They gave up that old, we're going to get to the truth business for this job of kind of
narrative framing,
guiding the game along. Okay. But without those videos and without some of those scary stories at first, you don't get eyes on the ball, right? And then you bring in authority figures. You introduce, Fauci.
Yeah, and you make stars. This is as you said, this is the OJ theory of how you do media. You create characters out of existing characters. And TV is tailor-made for this as long as the people are good in the roles. Fauci looks like a hygienic gel dispenser, right? He was sort of perfect for the part.
But you see, what I'm saying is not way out at all. All you have to know is something about how newspapers and magazine editors react to things. You can predict it. You can predict that any thematic element in a killing of this high profile will be reacted to in the most, absolutely rote ways. Oh, if it's a healthcare CEO and they're on the bullets, inscribed the words deny, depose, delay, which is a phrase from the health insurance industry about how to fight off claims. Well, come on, that's a gimme. We know how every editor we've ever met is going to react to that,
Right. And maybe does that mean we have a whole new generation of criminals who are media savvy in ways that the previous generation were not?
We absolutely do. This guy, you've got to understand we're in an AI world. In other words, even if things aren't done using computers, they're done using the principles of AI. So all I would have to do to run this current game is know something about the Unabomber, the Zodiac killer, how manhunts work, the JFK assassination, the Atlanta bombing, Olympic bombing story. I would only have to know how trials work, investigations work. I would have to know something about how things move through social media. I would have to know that manifestos are usually written in this way and they're discovered in a certain way. And it would be, writing a novel would be 1,000 times harder. It would take me 4 days training my myself on all these other stories to pick out wonderful elements, gripping storylines, useful character traits, and so on. And then let's say I'm a super smart kid. I just act it out. I act out the first part. And I actually, when I escape, I don't escape in the way that is best for escaping. And when I'm caught, I don't get caught in the way. I go to a McDonald's and where was McDonald's last in our consciousness? Donald Trump. But more and more,
well, that's a little meta. I mean, don't you think it was sort of random that he was caught in?
Dude, we don't know, do we? Because it's all filtered through institutions that I think the lesson of the last 5 years is not to trust them, and that they will, and that if they think that they have a noble cause, they'll do anything. They really will, Matt. And in other words, the knowledge and the means to carry out the kind of thing, the construction of this kind of all seductive game exists. Number two, the motive for it, I don't think is the killing of a guy, because it's much bigger than that. The motive is political. He didn't know this guy. This was meant to be symbolic. Even the slightest symbolic crime has an element of what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? It's meant to cause outrage.
Well, right. Okay. All right. But what's different about this is the response of kind of the quote unquote responsible people in media, right? So we didn't have a whole lot of people saying, yeah, the Unabomber is crazy, but he's kind of gotten a point. When he was blowing up people in the airline industry or computer executives or university professors or whatever it was. Even though that manifesto was, there were some sophisticated passages in there that were pretty interesting, especially in hindsight. But this time, and I would also add, going back to the summer of George Floyd, there was this weird sort of off-note response in the press and in social media, sort of asking us to endorse things that previously would have absolutely been condemned.
Right. And
so
one
what
of
is that?
and the big friction for the George Floyd thing was that it conflicted terribly with the game that was already going on called COVID. How do you reconcile the fact that everybody's supposed to stay inside and be scared and wear masks to everybody's supposed to go out into the streets? So they have some phony experts say, and the media go along with it, that somehow you shouldn't try to reconcile those 2 points. Dude, they literally got journalists to go along with that and not say, what are you people talking about?
Oh, I know. Yeah.
So the
they got health experts to sign off on it.
Dude, experts will say anything in order to get on TV these days. And experts who don't care about going on TV are muscled aside by the ones who do. I'm telling you, somebody said you're going off the deep end. Well, it's not me going off the deep end. Have you been around for the last few years? Were you around when they put kids at band recitals inside plastic tents? I'm going off the deep end?
Well, I mean, okay. Well, people are not accustomed to thinking in this way, right? I mean, it's just hard to really place.
Sure they are. Game designers are accustomed to thinking in this way. Computer programmers are designed to think it in this way. Script writers definitely are accustomed to thinking in this way. The only people who aren't accustomed to thinking in this way are a lot of the audience. Right. But the audience has already caught on. Part of the allure of this story is that a lot of it doesn't add up. Okay, but not adding up is what brings you into a story. It creates mystery, suspense. When you watch a movie about a crime, you're trying to solve the crime the whole time alongside the detective. The way that they get you to volunteer your energy for that is by laying in contradictory, alluring, sexy, politically loaded, and provocative clues and so on. Now, I think why people say I'm going off the deep end is they don't think there are any entities in society capable of doing this programming and having it succeed. But
Yeah.
there are.
Well, I mean, I guess we have to admit that possibility. And look, there's still things we haven't found out about, for instance, the construction of Russiagate or COVID. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why it's these investigations are so pressing. And from everything that I hear, there's going to be an intensity about disclosures around some of these stories, in the next year and a half or so. But a big part of that equation is the media equation. Right. What was the role in some of these agencies in quashing the lab leak theory, quashing or de-amplifying terms like gain of function? What was the role in getting people to avoid using terms like spy with when they were looking at Trump before the election, when the FBI was putting informants in there? I mean, these are things that we're just not used to thinking about because it's so outlandish. But I guess we just have to start doing it now.
But actually, what's outlandish is thinking that the media and politicians and everybody else, big commercial interests, huge financial interests, just sit back and let shit happen.
I guess so. I guess so.
Instead, instead of getting into the driver's seat. Now, we know that in the 1960s, with the Vietnam War and the way it was provoked, and then the way it was protested, and the whole life cycle of the story, we know now, in retrospect, that a lot of it was infiltrated, scripted, spoofed.
Yeah.
I mean, down to some of the bands and their music, and this book Chaos, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes to the way in which Laurel Canyon music scene, the Manson murder, and the drug culture and the anti-war movement were all
and at certain apocryphal stories, right? People throwing dog shit at returning soldiers and stuff like that, like that got repeated.
Imagine if you're trying to take over a country. You want to be able to take over the radio station. You want to be able to take over the Capitol, and maybe some big mine or some set of resources. And once you've got those three, you've got the country. Well, imagine if you have the ability both to provoke, create a story, and also to write about it and make a movie about it and watch the pacing of how it's discussed. And when something interesting comes out of it, you can amplify it or de-amplify it. Well, that's exactly what they did in COVID. What you turned up in the Twitter files was the government's attempt to guide and keep others from guiding and keep it from going off the rails, a mega story whose morals were fixed, whose morals they wanted, and and the reactions to which they wanted to control. They wanted people to stay inside. They didn't want people to associate in different ways. They wanted people not to take certain drugs. And behind the scenes, what you saw was the rigging of the responses. Oh, turn down those ivermectin people. Turn down those people who say there's natural immunity.
Right, natural immunity. In retrospect, it's so funny that natural immunity became like a deboostable word, a term.
Right,
but we
change the definition of vaccine from something that gives you a little bit of the disease itself to something that manipulates your body's response. And so they learned a lot, and we saw. Dude, there was a time when I used to have to argue on Twitter that there was such a thing as being shadow banned. You're crazy. You went off the deep end. Maybe you're just boring. Come on.
No, I mean, I remember when the Twitter put out that thing. What was it? It was like the truth about setting the record straight about shadow banning. And the lead was something like, in short, we do not. I forget exactly what the line was, but
when the
it was like exactly untrue,
when the Russiagate story was developing, another orthodox narrative that power was deeply invested in, right? And had the ability to manipulate to some extent. They had the ability certainly to manipulate it on MSNBC, but they were having a little trouble on Twitter. Okay, they came in there and they said, these are the leaders of the unorthodox faction. We'll just draw a circle around them, silence them. They'll only be heard by their followers. That's what happened to Jay Bhattacharya. But Americans just love their innocence, and they love their optimism, and they love their belief in common sense. So every time they're shown how a crime in the past was carried out, they go, wow, that's interesting. And they read a lot of bestsellers on it, so on, so on. And then the same one in a new, more, with 3D sound, 4D sound, is perpetrated. And they're like, wow, man, check this out. And anybody who tells them this is going to be like the other ones and run the same course, you're going to find out afterwards how it was done, is going off the deep end.
Well, I mean, yeah. In retrospect, I think we go back and look and you know, we were manipulated almost every major news story. You bring up Vietnam. It was, what was it, 14 or 15 years before people figured out what the real story was there because of the Pentagon Papers. So, yeah, these things drag on, and I guess you're right. The deviation is to believe that there isn't some interconnection between policy, the intelligence agencies, the news media, all that stuff. And we were,
Why, if you had the ability to use them, would you not use these tools?
well, because because in a functioning society you shouldn't need to. Hold on a second. I got to address this. People keep giving me a hard time about my tracksuit. Folks, I'm a tracksuit person. I wear tracksuits. It's funny to me. It's ironic. And I'm old, and this is what I wear. So just get over it. I'm sorry. Let's return to our normal.
So does Bret Easton Ellis. Go over to his apartment in LA. He'll come to the door in a tracksuit, man. What I was going to say is, there is something about Americans particularly. Listen, nothing that I'm saying here would have surprised an Eastern European. They were used to being fooled for, decades under communism. None of it would surprise Kafka, and certainly none of it would surprise Philip K. Dick, the great science fiction writer, who is more and more relevant every day, not because he went off the deep end, but because he perceived things about how our, quote, reality is structured, especially in a media age. And
well, I mean, that's definitely true. And especially in this recent period, you look back and you look, things seem more and more ridiculous. The recent coverage of recent news events seems more and more crazy. The more you look back, and this latest thing, I'm not at the point where I can see like the hand of the intelligence services behind the actual event, but certainly the response to it is amazing, especially when you compare it, for instance.
And it just happened to come along just when cable news ratings were plunging. It happened to come along just when Trump was threatening to expose the real plots, the ones that are going to prove the real conspiracy theorists right in many cases, right? Just when he was threatening to engross us in the real life exposure of what has been going on. And people have smelled a rat for a long time, and it's one of the reasons they voted for him, because they wanted those crypts opened. They wanted those files exposed. Just when all that's going to happen, wow, right before Thanksgiving, when everybody talks and all the networks come together, there's a killing that engrosses America that is almost like the Manson killings, which we've also found out retrospectively were not the innocent things that we, rageful satanic cult things that we thought, right?
Yes.
Have you read Chaos?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. Well, anybody who
last time I read, the last thing I read about that was Helter Skelter, and that was a million years ago. So yeah.
Well, Helter Skelter was the version of it. Was like the Warren Commission report. Okay.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I've spent way too much time in these grottos and caves. But what I'm telling you, even though it sounds spectacularly weird, but you see, we always default to how we would do things. The way we do things and the way other people, especially people in power and people with other motives and agendas, do things are completely different. Yeah, I can tell you that everybody who got into Ted Bundy's car because he had a broken arm and I felt sorry for him and whatever, and would have been shocked beforehand to learn that people go around to fake casts in order to get you into cars.
That's true. It's uncomfortable to think about people in positions of authority behaving like that, but perhaps they are.
Matt, there are actual memos that have come out over the years on how to design these stories and to even how to lay false trails of clues. Because let's transpose this to another country, okay? Do you think we might run an operation like this in another country where a powerful figure gets assassinated and use it to change the politics of that country? We do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, this does it. If you read the COINTELPRO memos and stuff like that, it's out there, but it does raise a lot of questions about what exactly they're doing now. But
I'm not asserting that it's got some specific actor or set of actors behind it. I'm only saying that it's completely plausible and probably inevitable that something like this could be designed. The tools exist for it. The suspect himself was probably capable of it. I don't know if he was capable of the whole operation, but so I think people have got this old binary thing, like you're talking about a conspiracy theory. No, I'm just talking about the like nuclear version of the Zodiac killer who sends in puzzles to the San Francisco Chronicle in code and gets everybody scared and obsessed and afraid to go out at night and so on.
Right. Well, and then but in that case, the media reaction was what you would expect, fascination, everybody attempting to figure it out. There's this weird moralistic element to it it's like a totally separate script that's being foisted on us. Very strange. But I want to shift just quickly as this was happening, this other story that's been sort of massively, I think, undercovered, and not just in New Jersey, but I guess all over the country. But this sudden appearance of all these car-sized drones, and I think I've seen them over my house.
Matt, I was on the phone with you talking about this thing when you looked out and said, "Oh my God, I think there's one outside my window."
Right. Yeah. No. My wife and I are we there's like drone o'clock at around 11. We just sort of see things on the horizon around here. But that started appearing somewhere between November 18th, November 22nd, something like that. And you had this very interesting observation about things that are in our cultural memory and how bringing up that. By the way, the War of the Worlds took place in this exact part of the country. And I had forgotten about this. So if we could just go back and play from the War of the Worlds. Folks, for those not familiar, this is the famous Orson Welles adaptation that created all kinds of havoc because
it was okay. It was exactly what people didn't see coming, weren't prepared for, and didn't think possible, because it was done on live radio as a newscast, okay? And people couldn't get their head around the idea of a fake newscast. They couldn't get their head around somebody going on the radio, our communication channel, and telling a story that they didn't say was a story, that they were going to pretend was real life. So everybody was like a Native American before smallpox came over. They didn't have any immunity to this trick.
Right. No one had ever heard this before, and it was amazingly produced. And anybody who's ever watched any Orson Welles movie knows that this is a maestro of visual, scene, screenplay writing, and all that stuff. He was fantastic, and this is amazingly produced. But I just wanted to play this little part because just to remind people of what part of the world this was taking place.
World famous astronomer Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pearson from Dr. Gray of the Natural History Museum, New York. Quote, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote. Professor Pearson, Could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton.
Sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, you get the idea. This goes on, and it's a series of disturbances that happen right around this part of the world, is sort of outside New York City, and it's in our cultural memory that all this stuff took place here, and voila. And you mentioned, you and I talked about this because I was wigging out about this over the weekend, and you mentioned, there's literature about this, that people are going to be bringing this up, or they'll be playing on the fact that it's in the back of your mind. And before you know it, I start noticing that people are bringing it up all over the place. So if we could listen to, this is from Good Morning America, I think either today or sometime in the last couple of days.
We're going to turn now to the FBI and New Jersey authorities asking for the public's help as they navigate a series of nighttime drone sightings. Eric Katursky is back with more on these sightings there, and they're raising a lot of concern.
Sure are. It's a real mystery. And from the Hindenburg to War of the Worlds, people have been watching the skies over New Jersey for decades. Of late, they've seen clusters of drones flying creepily overhead. This has been a regular thing in central New Jersey, night after night, for a couple of weeks now. These drones have been described as larger than what a hobbyist might fly and as loud as a small plane. The sheriff of Morris County said the drone activity has been observed by many. And now the FBI is getting involved, asking the public to report all sightings and send in video. Some of the drones have flown pretty close to Picatinny Arsenal military base and to President-elect Trump's Bedminster Golf Club. So the FAA has now restricted drone flights near both. This morning, authorities are acknowledging the public's concern about.
So what's the difference between those two broadcasts that we just saw?
You mean the War of the Worlds and that?
Yeah.
I don't know. The production values are similar, I guess, right? I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Well, okay, let's inspect the first one.
Mm-hmm.
We now know what Orson Welles' voice sounds like, but people didn't recognize it then because he just started. They do a fake broadcast. Oh, breaking news! We've just heard this. The National Astronomical Society. They sort of know what those institutions sound like, so they made up something that sounds like it. And notice how they kept mentioning Princeton, because Princeton is an authoritative, serious place, and if Princeton says something, maybe it's serious.
Well,
Okay.
but it's so funny that the Princeton professor is wrong.
Right.
He misdiagnoses. It's perfect.
Right. They've got exactly. It has all the raggedness and uncertainty and seeming randomness and mistake-filledness of real life. Okay. So the second one, I said, what's similar between the two? Somebody said nothing. No, almost everything except one thing. In the War of the Worlds, the craft were all in your imagination. And in the second one, they can show you craft in the sky. Okay. Also, in the second one, the people who are reading the narration aren't aware that they're fooling people. But that doesn't mean somebody doesn't know. What would be the possible reason to stage a War of the Worlds thing? Well, lots of reasons. Maybe you want to have drone maneuvers in the sky for military reasons. People are going to see them. You know that that's going to cause consternation. How do they even know? How do these newscasters even know they're drones? Did they catch one? They don't. They were told that, right?
Right.
So they don't have any really primary information, and none's being given, but we're being assured that everything's okay. So what I'm telling you is that the primary phenomena in this case, which is the drones, just like it was the murder in the other one, are all seen through media. Man, like you can tell people about deep fakes, but they think you'll never use them. They think you can, and I'm not saying they're using them now, but I'm saying that there is a borderline between events and how events are covered and the ability to measure the public's response to them, which can be exploited and planned for. I think this is a more simple story, the drone sightings. I think for some reason we want to do drone maneuvers, maybe in preparation for a threat that we don't want to tell the people about.
Okay, but that's crazy, but that's an explanation that fits the available set of facts. So we had the governor, Phil Murphy, met with Mayorkas from the Department of Homeland Security, and there's no public statement about what this is. There's no guess. We have all these state senators. Actually, we have congressmen, members of Congress, in New Jersey, including like Tom Kean Jr. Was sort of issued a statement begging for what he called an in-depth public briefing. And we had another congressman. We had a Democrat from the New Jersey, the first district, which is, I guess, the Camden area, also expressing sort of anger at a lack of answers from the federal government. It does not seem plausible that they don't know what the hell this is. I just, or that they can't. I don't know. We have people all over New Jersey saying, why don't they just shoot one of these things down? We have reported downed drone sightings every night. It seems like there was supposedly one in the Pine Barrens. There was supposedly one in Lebanon, New Jersey, a couple of nights ago. And I can't for the life of me understand the lack of some kind of a plausible answer from governors or the Department of Homeland Security. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how to process this story. Do you?
This one's a lot easier than the other. Okay. Because it has fewer working parts. There are very few entities on planet Earth capable of launching drones in this number and of this size. The number one candidate is the U.S. military. The next one is the Chinese. The next two are the Chinese and Russian militaries. Okay. So one suspect goes into the lead. What motives might that suspect have to not tell the truth about what they're doing? Well, national security covers everything, right? Say they have they're searching for something. They're testing a new kind of aircraft that is meant to operate in like suburban, urban environments. So everybody's going to see it. So they just have to
do it in Mozambique. Like, why do it over New Jersey? This is the part that I don't get. Like,
because for some reason, say there was a threat, say there was an enemy threat, or they feel that that's the most exposed place on the East Coast. Say there was something like 9/11, only using drones that they had heard a plot about. These things aren't just flying around to be shown to people. In other words, I'm more of a realist about this story than I'm about the other. There's actually technology involved. So unless they're projections or something, and they're not. So
no, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And
that the government's not reacting means the government's doing it. To me, it's simple. And that they're telling us to calm down about it means that they know what it is. But then otherwise they're admitting that the most important airspace in the United States, in the greater New York City metropolitan area, is completely penetrable by unknown craft that can operate.
Well, right. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, isn't part of national security making us feel secure? We've got these weird things flying over our houses, and we're not supposed to ask questions about that. I mean, they were censoring the internet on the basis of national security, but they can't tell us a basic, even something falsely reassuring about what's going on over our heads. And then, the other bizarre thing about this is the total, like a seeming absence of concern. And I keep looking on the front page of the New York Times for stories about the drones, and it's like maybe I'm missing them, but I look in vain on most days for any hint that this is happening. And this is right outside New Jersey. I mean, right outside the Manhattan. I don't get it. It's very strange to me. This
Well,
whole thing.
I have a contact in the world of drone technology. Okay, somebody I've talked to for a couple of years. Everybody across the world, and you just have to be following the Ukraine-Russia war, knows that drones are the future of warfare, right? Now, they can be used offensively, and they can be used to sort of monitor spaces. It would be irresponsible for the U.S. military not to anticipate drone warfare coming to the mainland of the U.S. in some way. So, but how do they train for it? Well, they can train for it out in deserts, which they do. I live in Las Vegas. I've gone to Creech Air Force Base where you can stand on the highway and watch, drones of all kinds taking off. And, you're not allowed to fly your own. You're not allowed to fly little ones because they actually can get the signature of your drones. So they have absolutely the technology to know what every one of these things is.
Well,
Dude, if they know about missiles coming over the North Pole, they know about drones over New Jersey. Like, no one is seriously contemplating the fact that they don't know, except for the UFO people. And now I study and take seriously the UFO UAP phenomena, mostly because it evinces principles that I can use in understanding other stories where there's no bottom, where you never seem to find out the facts, but the stories go on. And they are excited as hell. They're ranging from their UFOs, and the government's just not telling us because it doesn't want to admit its impotence, its powerlessness. This is the others showing up at a time of war to warn us, or to monitor us. They have all kinds of theories. Some of them think that there's alien ships up there, but they're putting up a bunch of drones to kind of get them lost in the shuffle so that we won't notice we don't notice the real pattern in our skies. But again, I tell you, some people say, the meaning of a system is what it does. Get used to this idea. The meaning of a story is what it does. Now, I think that really applies in the case of the assassination. And it applies somewhat in this case. I think this one's pretty prosaic.
But to me, it's unacceptable, right? It means that somebody knows something and they're not telling us, and they're allowing conspiracy theories to proliferate, the UFO stuff to proliferate, and they're letting a whole state full of people get freaked out. Somebody must have an answer about this that's more sophisticated than what they're putting out there.
What is the basic thing that we've learned about where COVID came from?
Oh, they told us a bunch of stories that were patently untrue, a series of them that turned out to be each more ridiculous than the next, involving a series of suspect animals that turned out not to be the actual cause. And now we have the FBI, the Department of Energy, a couple of congressional committees, all pointing towards the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and we're going to find out more about that. I mean, that's part of the backstory of what's going on right now, as a matter of fact.
But in that case, Matt, the answer to my question, as I see it, is that they knew a hell of a lot more than they were letting on, and they were perfectly willing to use deception and the pretense of ignorance to cover that fact. Now, we've seen that. Why can't we learn? Why do we think everything reverts to a fucking fairy tale after it turns?
I get it. I get it, Walter. But what happened with COVID? We're supposed to think of that as an aberration and maybe even criminal. What happened? And I just can't get used to the idea that we're supposed to just suck it up and say, okay, they're doing this. Like the response to this is just it doesn't fit for me. I don't know.
Well, as I say, this is a more capital intensive thing to, build drones and put them up there. But since there are only really 3 suspects, and since the number 1 suspect is also the one that's telling us the story,
right,
then I would say you're not from Missouri and you're not really an American who's attentive to bullshit.
Okay, it's the top of the hour. I guess I think we should just check in on if Rachel's on tonight. I'm imagining there's a Daniel Penny tirade coming. So could we check that out? Is that possible?
Somebody said, okay.
Excellent. Thanks, my friend. Much appreciated. And thanks to you at home for joining us.
Namaste.
So have you ever had an HR issue at work? Human resources? I feel like the poor human resources people get a really bad
We're torturing our audience, Walter. How long should we put this?
And most annoying stuff that happens in the workplace. Right? Nobody sees the HR department when they're at their best, right? But they do a really important job. You need them. There has to be somebody to call. There has to be somebody to intervene when things go really wrong or really weird.
This technique of giving you no idea where she's going, but her knowing where she's going.
Job. You want to get hired on at a new company, and you are asked to detail for your new employer your personality characteristics. They ask you to fill out an intake form. And specifically, they ask you to disclose on this intake
form. Is this United or is this
potential new
Daniel
employer,
Penny?
Matt, we never guess right.
Personality characteristics you think apply to you. Quote, I like to show off my body.
It's Hegseth. It's got to be.
I like to look at myself in the mirror. Is that one of your personality characteristics?
I know it's one of yours, Rachel. You're on freaking TV.
I want you to put in writing. Do these personality characteristics apply to you? Quote, I don't have that much interest in having sexual experiences with another person. Excuse me? Sorry? Again, this is from your boss, from your would-be boss, asking you these questions, asking if these so-called personality characteristics.
See, Matt, now I'm stuck in the game. I'm stuck in the game. I got to find out what the hell she's talking about.
Asked of you as part of you applying for a job. Another personality characteristic this application, this intake form asks you about.
I'm usually pretty good at this.
It asks you if you would describe yourself this way, quote, I consistently use my physical appearance to draw attention to myself. Quote, I have chronic feelings of emptiness.
I think these are all her.
I love large parties. Quote, I leave a mess in my room. My room? What room? Quote, I do not enjoy going to art museums.
See, Matt?
Quote, I get upset when people don't notice how I look when I go out in public.
Man, I got nothing. Okay.
I don't for a job. And you're asked to declare these things, whether these are your
it's a narcissism thing.
Here's my favorite one. Again, what your employer is asking in considering whether or not you're going to be hired, whether or not you're suited for a job. Does this personality trait apply to you? Quote, I believe in things many others don't, like having a sixth sense, clairvoyance, and telepathy. And as an adolescent, I had bizarre fantasies or preoccupations. That's all one thing. That is listed as all one personality trait per this.
Okay, here it comes.
Question, this intake form.
It's the one you suffer from.
Telepathy, so like ESP and clairvoyance, and also having bizarre adolescent fantasies and preoccupations. Those
mental
are all listed
fentanyl,
as
perfect.
And what do you say? You're really trying to be honest. You really want this job. It's really important to you. What do you say to your would-be employer, your would-be boss when you're
This is the opposite of news. Remember the pyramid where you're supposed to put the facts up top and then get down to this shit?
Wanting to paint myself blue.
The inverted pyramid.
But no, I don't believe in ESP.
Yeah,
are you allowed to say that? Are you allowed to split it up? Or are you allowed to say, yes, I definitely believe in telepathy? For example, I'm controlling you with my mind right now. But no.
Yes, you're trying to do that. I know that.
Like everyone else.
You're not controlling mine.
Can you split it up? Are you allowed to question the question? What do you tell your would-be boss if only half of this individual
RFK
applies?
Somebody guessed. I think that's
it. And this is the intake form that you are filling out to try to get a job.
Yeah.
HR gets a bad rap. I know nobody likes the idea of going to HR for anything. But if you're applying for a job and your would-be boss asks you as part of the job application process, if you like to, quote, show off your body, if your would-be boss asks you how interested you are in sex.
Dude, just spit it out, lady.
And this would-be boss wants you to put the answer
It's
in
gotta
writing
be. It's
and
gotta be in
submit
the
it to the
transition.
company.
It's a transition thing.
Call HR, right? I mean, nobody wants to, but honestly, call HR. Maybe call the cops. I mean, definitely don't take that job.
This is supposedly the news, dude. This is a news channel.
It's a 5-minute
that I
lead.
just showed you.
It's a
Trump
hypnosis
transition has now
channel.
Confirmed.
I told you.
That
okay, here
is
we
the
go.
questionnaire
There
that
he
is
is.
being administered to people who
Ding,
want to
ding,
work
ding, ding.
for the U.S. government in the second term of Donald J. Trump. Tara Palmieri.
Okay, can we just stop now? I've had
first
enough.
report and first
I've had
get
enough.
confirmation from the.
I've
Goodbye,
had
Mr.
enough.
Producer. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
number one, all those questions are on standard personality tests. The Minnesota multiphasic test and whatever. They're used in hiring, they're used in the military, they're used in all kinds of places. So they're not as freaky as she said. They come with 100 other questions that she didn't put down, and they're meant to profile somebody psychologically. She cherry-picked them, as is her wont, to make it seem like it's somehow psychotic to ask these questions, when in fact they're the standard questions on a personality test. Number two, her target's RFK, okay? The reason you watch it is because you want to find out what the target is, and you want to find out what all her emotion is about. What's all her outrage about? Like the outrage comes first, meaning they program you with the attitude you're supposed to have about the thing, and then they reveal the thing, and she's already built the attitude, right?
Can I make an observation about that? She switched of late from solemn, urging you to think things that the most serious thing that you've ever considered is about to happen, to bemusement. You know, you're about to hear something that's really funny and kind of twisted, but whatever. Like she's moved into whatever mode since the election, which is I think interesting.
So
Right.
so what she's doing is similar to what I was talking about before. She's trying to stimulate the conspiracy theory part of people's brains, okay? And she's doing it through selective, evidence, through a tone of outrage, through withholding the answer to the mystery so that you're in suspense and you'll pay closer attention and you'll start guessing along with her, just like we did. Now, am I going off the deep end if I tell you Rachel Maddow is fake? No, you all know that by now. But 6 years ago, when people thought she was going to reveal Trump's tax returns and give us all the truth about, the Russiagate investigation, people say, Walter, come on, but we can be fooled over and over again because we don't want to believe that the authority figures would lie. And they know that about us, and they lie.
Yes. No, but I also think there's just a limited window left for this kind of thing. I mean, we're kind of looking in at Rachel almost as I don't know, out of
post-mortem. It's like Sunset. It's like Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, exactly. Gloria Swanson.
The last Rachel Maddow show will be, it's the cable news that got small.
Right. Exactly. And the larger meta narrative, not to get too serious about all this, in this moment of extreme unrest all around the world. We've got Assad appearing in Moscow and Damascus Falls and Romania and all this other craziness going on, but there is this kind of ongoing clash between a desire to ground the entire country back in reality to some degree, and this other thing that's sort of pushing us wildly off into madness continually. I just think
Matt, you had a great tweet on that when you said, just when I thought reality was making a comeback.
Right.
But that is the truth. People just voted in an election over real issues, the quality of their lives, things they're seeing on the streets, things that are, absolutely key to their economic and existence, whether I'll be able to buy a home and so on. And here they are leading us off into fairyland. Now, Rachel Maddow didn't lead tonight with Syria. She didn't lead tonight with any of the stories you would expect from a respectable cable news. You turn to the History Channel and you're
a respectably insane cable news station. Like, I would have led with any of this stuff. Like, I'd have the drones on 24/7 if I were a cable news station, and I would play up the UFO angle. But go ahead.
What's her big story tonight? RFK.
Yeah, it's like anti-ratings. Like, what do you do?
But
that's the point of that.
But that's because that's the real enemy as far as these people are concerned. This is all infighting between establishments and elites. And there is no single figure on the American scene, short of Trump and Musk himself, as threatening to as many interests, including the sponsors of Rachel Maddow's show, than RFK. Dude, we just watched her carry water for the pharmaceutical industry against its biggest enemy, number one. That's what you just did.
Yeah, and we're also about to. This is in the wake of news that there are going to be investigations continuing into Fauci, into NIH, NIAID, all those things.
Well, while the world is burning, Rachel is worried about one thing: Pfizer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Pfizer and the threats to Pfizer. So, call me cynical, call me off the deep end, but you just saw someone taking some of the most valuable real estate in American media and using it on behalf of her sponsors to go after their sponsor's biggest political enemy.
So we talked a little bit about the story. Actually, we talked in last week's episode about the range of preemptive pardons that may be coming, and there's been escalating dialogue about that ever since Trump himself gave an interview that I would say was a little startling over the weekend with Meet the Press, talking about how everyone in the J6 committee, they should, for what they did, should probably go to jail. And Kristen Welker at NBC pushed back, and he kind of softened what he said a little bit after that and put it on the DOJ and the FBI and saying they have to look into that. But there's also been competing talk from the Democratic side about the need for pardons. And last night on MSNBC, Jen Psaki, who we just saw there handing off to Rachel, interviewed Andrew Weissman, one of my favorite people in the world. And this is what he had to say about the possibility of pardons. Let's see if we can look at this. Hang on a second.
Who do you think, if you're considering this within the Biden administration, should be prioritized to be granted a pardon? Is it a small list? Is it a big list? Who should be on that list?
Well, I think the big picture is you have to remember that the whole reason for having sort of the Cash Patel lists and the former presidents, now president-elect's comments is to instill fear and to cause people to pull their punches, whether they are in the government or whether they're in the media or whether they're corporate executives. That's the goal here. And it is true that one of the things that could happen is we could see these kinds of prosecutions and a shot across the bow. And I'm not just concerned about the people who could be targeted now, but as Neil sort of alluded to, it's the next group. It's the people who, the next special counsels, the next people who are going to have an allegiance to the Constitution and not to a person. And so there are a lot of positive reasons to be doing this kind of protective
pardoning,
or upholding the rule of law.
It's the it's the opposite of pre-crime
to these kinds of threats, especially when one thing that is completely absent is any, as you said, Jen, any statement of fact about why these people would possibly be prosecuted. In other words, there's nothing which anyone has articulated as to what on God's green earth Dr. Fauci, a national hero, did other than save really, you could say, millions of lives across the globe.
Right. So
okay,
dude,
go ahead, yeah.
No, you talk first. I get too wound up and I interrupt and ugh.
So it's not just that he said exactly the opposite 4 years ago when Trump was pardoning people like George Papadopoulos for, in an exactly analogous situation, right? So Papadopoulos was prosecuted for misstatements to the FBI. Fauci,
but it's not analogous.
Well, no,
because George Papadopoulos was actually prosecuted for something. They're talking about pardoning people for things they haven't been prosecuted for before they can be.
True. That's true. But this is a prosecutor. This is an officer of the law getting on television saying no one has articulated what could possibly be an offense of Anthony Fauci when a 512-page report just dropped last week by a House committee that said that he misled Congress, that he lied to the Senate. I think that is actually an offense. Whether or not it's a viable prosecution, I think it needs to be borne out. But this is the one where he was asked, if they funded gain of function research, and he said no, absolutely not. And people within his own agency did disagree with him. So there's something there. I mean, whether or not you agree with it is another thing. But it's just it's the brazenness of that whole act that is just incredible to me. I mean, I never stopped. I guess I shouldn't stop being surprised by it, but I am.
He's a lawyer. He makes the argument most advantageous to his client. Understand his client in the abstract is probably this party and this power structure in this case. It doesn't matter if the argument is a complete inversion of the truth. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a murder case where, if it seems that the guy is completely guilty, they accuse the murder victim of having done something that made them murder him or her. In other words, reverse causality is lawyering number one, and we've got to pardon people because
that's upholding the law.
Because they might be charged with a crime someday, dude.
Right.
You're not pardoning from anything. Like I said, this is not pre-crime. This is pre-innocence.
Right.
In other words, we're going to stipulate we're going to stipulate your innocence before you can be charged. Number two, hey, you're a lawyer. You know that the point at which they tell you, what the crime is the arrest or grand jury phase of things. They don't say, hey, listen, other side, possible targets of prosecution. Here's all the things we're thinking about charging you with so that you can, prepare your defense before we even knock on your door.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that gets to my point, though. You mentioned he's a lawyer. I expect lawyers to give a lawyered argument in this situation, right? So you wouldn't go out and say no one has articulated anything. Andrew Weissman probably, I'm guessing he knows that there's a grand jury investigation of COVID's origins that the DOJ has opened.
Of course he knows.
Right. So he knows that. He knows there's this congressional report out there that there's a whole issue about perjury, not just involving and NIAID figures, but a whole range of people. There's people refusing subpoenas, refusing to turn over documents, obstruction of justice questions. He's got to know that. So I expect him to say something a little bit more subtle, like you could leave out the part that no one has articulated that and just say, we're talking about Anthony Fauci, a hero who saved millions of people. You could leave out that other little bit. That's what's so weird about this whole era is it's the extras where they say something that's just factually easily disprovable and expect to, to just let it ride. It's hard to get used to.
But let's get used to it, really. You know, let's get used to the fact that Anthony Fauci can lie and his lawyer can lie about him. And in fact, there's much evidence that Fauci lied because we now have emails showing what he really thought and was really talking about behind the scenes compared to what he's testified to. So, you know, continually being astonished about deception is not really a rational response at this point in history. And that they can do it well is probably why they have the jobs they do, to be honest with you. And so the pardon thing, though, is just wonderful. There's a reverse causality. In the future, there might be prosecutions. So we are going to do this thing, which isn't pardoning, which is all about the past. Pardoning's all about getting you out of a, you know, conviction or prosecution that you're already involved with. Now we're looking into the future, into what's possible. And the only way they could float this creative scenario about the need for pardons is by creating the arch villain Donald Trump and the arch villain Kash Patel, and all of the things that justify them are things that they've defended in the past. They've told us in the past that DOJs or you know, independent agencies, and how dare you think that attorney generals can start political prosecutions. But as I said once on Twitter, my part gypsy mother used to say to me, if you look behind the door, you've been behind the door. Meaning if you look for somebody to hide, see if someone's hiding behind the door, that's because you've hid behind the door and you know it's a good hiding place. Okay.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of projection going on of late. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe 100% of this stuff is projection, because the only way to turn a situation that's pretty clear into another situation is to show you an inverted mirror image of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that brings us to the recent comments by Barack Obama. I guess I should try to call those up as well.
Right.
You know, since we're speculating about some pretty weird stuff, what about the whole concept that, you know, essentially what happened in 2016? My read of what happened in 2016 is that the Trump investigation created like almost like a government in exile, but within the United States, because all the institutions, the major institutions, were still very loyal to the Democratic Party. We had this massive campaign trying to convince everybody that, you know, we had a Russian agent in the White House, and it was successful for quite a long time. But I almost feel like this time we're gonna have an actual government in exile, like in Europe. They're gonna go over there to regroup, and sort of fire missiles at the populist hellhole that the United States has become after all these pardons take place. I don't know. Is that a crazy theory that we're going to see a retreat of the former Martha's Vineyard elite to? Let me play this clip first. Hold on a second. Here we go. Oops, sorry. Here we go. I'm sorry.
There are going to be times potentially when one side tries to stack the deck and lock in a permanent grip on power, either by actively suppressing votes or politicizing the armed forces or using the judiciary, the criminal justice system to go after opponents. And in those circumstances, pluralism does not call for us to just stand back and say, well, I'm not sure.
I guess we discussed this before, but
wait, this part.
Circumstances, a line has been crossed and we have to stand firm.
So a line has been crossed and we have to stand firm. But I don't know.
Calling,
what does that
that's
mean?
a call. That's a call. That's a call to the street, to the rank and file, to rise up against something that he knows is coming. Listen, those pauses were fake. All of that drama was Maddow-esque, where he touched his chin because he's afraid that what he's about to say is so controversial that it pains him to even say it. That was a performance. It was, and its meaning was, they're going to do everything that we know they can do, and that
because we did
it. Because we did it, and we want to pre-bunk it as some kind of takeover or something. And we want to tell you with a wink, wink, because I'm an ex-president. It's not like I can foment rebellion openly. That you have every right to just do what you think you should do and stand tall, whatever that means.
Yeah, stand tall, stand firm, right?
I was doing my Obama pauses there in case anybody thought those were.
Obama's speech affectations are really interesting. Would you classify him as a good speaker, like a good orator?
First time I saw him in San Antonio while he was campaigning in 2008, I guess. He was a very fluid speaker who basically did a modified Harvard version of the gospel rhythms of an American evangelist in the Black church, but also a guy who'd been on the Harvard Law Review. When I saw him speak again in 2012 at the Democratic Convention, he seemed hollow, empty, like he was going through the motions. Right there, he just seemed scared, defeated, absolutely beaten down.
He's aged quite a lot lately, it seems like. Yeah.
But but on all fronts there, and with Weissman or whatever his name is, we're being prepared for a showdown, and they're doing their best to frame it in advance as a defensive action against the cannibal, the monster, the unconstitutional would-be Hitler, Donald Trump. And actually, when I see how many pardons they're considering, right? When I see what they perceive to be their downside, and I realize they know and have more downside than I anticipated. I mean, the Hunter Biden pardon didn't have to be a sweeping pardon for almost 11 years into the past. It could have been for a couple things. That showed me, there's a time period in which bad behavior went on that they're trying to protect. Okay.
Right.
They're trying to bracket a period, at least from 2014 up until, that day. Well, and then they're talking about all these things. Trump, the boogeyman, was meant, and the whole he's Hitler was meant to authorize in advance these crazy moves that they're going to make because they're freaking panicked.
Yeah. But I think it's worth pointing out that there is a risk. So Trump, I think, has a very easy political path ahead of him if they're just smart about it. All they have to do is just start releasing stuff into the void, issuing disclosures on one front after the other about all these different stories that took place over the last 8 years or so. But they can lose ground if there's any of the kind of overreach of the sort that these folks are talking about. And it's not impossible that could happen. Trump is talking of, that was I thought an impolitic way to give an interview to meet the press, talking about they should go to jail. I mean, it's the kind of thing that we always ding presidents for, But
it's also the thing that Trump specializes in, man.
It's true. I'm just saying that politically, the game is won at this point. All they have to do is kneel on the football for the next 4 years.
There's no election coming up. He doesn't have to think about politics. He has to think about what's going to work. If keeping people scared and putting them in a bit of a panic so that they start getting on their phones, that who knows, may already be monitored by law enforcement and coming up with their escape plans and talking about pardons, if that is an effective strategy, a sort of madman theory that, that Nixon propounded in Vietnam, if they don't know what you're going to do, they're more scared of you.
Yeah, remember Thomas Friedman articulated that one before the Iraq War. His metaphor was, a person driving without a steering wheel is crazy. You're afraid of that actor on the road, and that's how we should behave in Iraq. We should be like a motorist without a steering wheel. But
see, Trump does this all the time in foreign affairs. Like recently, he warned the people keeping the American hostages in Gaza that if you don't give back those hostages, you're going to get a response like no one has ever seen in the history of the world. And Well, obviously what he's doing is he's trying to scare them into capitulating early. Now, the carrot and stick being both interrogation partners, the reasonable guy and the pissed off guy, is a wonderful technique, especially in negotiations. And what Trump's doing is a negotiation with another group. And the reason he wants this other group to get out of the way, I absolutely can tell you, is not because he wants revenge. He wants them out of the way because they represent the institutional obstacles to the reforms that he's promised and he knows he will be remembered for.
Yeah, I agree. I understand that. I just think that, well, maybe there's a reason he's being elected president and I'm not, but it seems to me that there's a lot of risk in doing that when all you have to do is get into office, open up the files of every executive branch agency and just start pouring stuff out into the public about every lie that's been told in the last 8 years. COVID's a big one, right? There's just going to be stuff everywhere about material not turned over, interviews given to the FBI by confidential human sources that were not disclosed to Congress. There's going to be like just mounds and mounds of that stuff. It's just it's a pure win for them if they just pour that stuff out there. You don't have to do an end zone dance about it and threaten people. I get what you're saying, but
Matt, there's a lot of people who voted for him who want to see those people in jail. Why shouldn't he service that group by, talking tough? And then later he shows mercy and he's Donald Trump the merciful. There's a lot of paths to political popularity, and some of them lie through being a little outrageous at first and then, more reasonable later. But let's look at what the Trump administration is shaping up to be. Donald Trump. Okay, we know about him. RFK, sworn enemy of the food additive, chemical additive, agricultural combined with the drug companies and the public health, aspect of all that. Kash Patel, a guy who's going to head the FBI, the same FBI that corruptly investigated Donald Trump. And so on. That's just 3. And Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are sworn to go into the giant blob, talk about the Twitter files. They're going into the DC files.
That's what I mean. That's all they. If they do that, if they do like the DC files, they could.
But it makes their job easier because it's actually going to be hard to do all this. They're going to face all kinds of gluey dilemmas about what to disclose and people threatening them and legal challenges and so on. But right now it's a freebie to say the monster's coming. Get ready.
That's true.
And rather than when it comes time, we're going to sort of maybe see that it's hard for Elon Musk to cut half of a certain department and send them out the door. So at this point, I don't think there's much downside in for him in growling a lot, just like there isn't in a grizzly bear attacking you. It doesn't want to have to actually attack you. You might fight back. So it goes, rah!
Right. Yeah, no, I see that. I'm just expressing my fear about how this could play out, right? Like I think the winning the election gave them a mandate to just crush the bug of all this this sort of insectoid march against truth that we've had for the last 8 years, and they now they're about to get the keys to every box full of documents that you could possibly want. And people who are direct victims of wrong propaganda, censorship, they're going to be in charge of these agencies. Think about that. Jay at NIH, Tulsi at the DNI, it's just Cash at the FBI.
The interesting thing about Trump's appointments, his top line appointments, is that many of these people are the victims of the behavior that they're now going to be able to investigate.
Right. That's why the politics of those appointments make such sense. There were some that were maybe a little bit eyebrow raising in a few directions, but most of them made a lot of sense just as proof of concept. In other words, the Trump campaign implicitly was a rebellion against all these machinations of these institutions, and by nominating somebody like Bhattacharya, who was censored, who was the plaintiff in that, in the big free speech case, it shows you that they're real enough about trying to roll back that kind of activity, and that there's going to be somebody in charge of that office who's going to have a vested interest in putting out everything possible about how fucked up things were previously. So that's great. I just think you don't need to do a whole lot of politicking since you've got this big Indiana Jones style treasure ahead of you. Just coast toward it. That would be my instinct. But
this is called in military terms preparing the battle space. Now, I think that so Kash Patel, an investigator for the Republican House, who exposed a lot of the machinations of Russiagate. Okay, he's the FBI. RFK, who has been target number one for the pharmaceutical industry because of his skepticism about some of their product. They put him in. Jay Bhattacharya, who Fauci and others called a fringe epidemiologist, and whose point of view about lockdowns and everything was rolled over. He's in charge of NIH. But the most brilliant worm turns, victim turned ruler appointment is Pete Hegseth, because Pete Hegseth represents the veteran. He represents the soldiers who the DOD uses like cannon fodder that get sent to wars and, over and over and over, that don't get won, that have bad endings. Pete Hegseth is an incarnation of the American soldier. He's got tattoos. He, has kind of a brawling past, it looks like. And his job is to stand in for that entire class of people and take the job of the people who usually send you to your death, if that's necessary. Now that is turnabout, man.
Yeah, well, let's hope he plays that role. I mean, Trump's history with the defense budget doesn't suggest that there's going to be this huge revolutionary turn with the DOD. But
I don't think Trump's. Well, listen, he's got Elon Musk out there already talking, probably in an authorized way, about cutting the fat in defense. He's even having these public conversations with Ron Paul, of all people, about defense spending. I don't think those are occurring without Trump's permission or knowledge. But the problem with Trump is that he raises expectations, that he bluffs really big in the beginning, and then it's kind of business as usual. For me, if I was advising him, I'd say, don't create unrealistic expectations. Under promise, over deliver, as they say.
Yeah, and a lot of the fat in government, especially with defense/intelligence, is in areas that are were designed to enhance presidential power, secrecy, all those things. So there's going to be it'll be interesting to see if he actually follows through on essentially cutting his own spending authority, things like that. I mean, that's going to be a fascinating subtext to watch. And by the way, you mentioned Hegseth representing the soldiers, so does Tulsi Gabbard, right? I mean,
right.
We haven't had that kind of person in a position like the DNI in quite a long time, who isn't a career intelligence creep. We've had some people who maybe you wouldn't instantly vomit if you were in the same room with them, but most of them have risen through the ranks of the intelligence services. So all of this criticism of her coming in, that she's totally unprepared, that's a plus as far as I'm concerned, that she's not one of them. So
his last DNI was Richard Grinnell, right? Rick Grinnell,
Mm-hmm.
who was an ambassador to Germany, I think, before then. I don't know if Grinnell is a veteran, but his resume compared to hers for this job, I would say, was less impressive. I think no major terrible things happened because he was in that post. Part of our job as reporters is to tell people what we know and what we've seen that they may not. And I've seen Tulsi Gabbard exactly once in real life, and that was with you at that Rescue the Republic rally in D.C. And I stood at the bottom of the stage and saw her speak. I saw her interact backstage. Never got up to talk to her because she had heavy security. But my sense of her was, this is one of the toughest people on earth. And when she spoke, there were practically tears in her eyes. And she was speaking for the kind of, how can I put it, the abused American service people who are the pawns in these endless war games. And if she's not sincere, then I know nothing about human beings. If she's not motivated by a kind of absolute moral fire, then I don't know people at all.
Yeah, I mean, I know Tulsi a little bit better. I mean, I have some history with her with previous campaigns. I remember sitting with her in a little cafe in New Hampshire during near the start of her last campaign. I've talked to her a bunch of times over the years, and look, she's been through a lot. She's been through multiple bizarre propaganda campaigns that were infuriating, right? This whole insinuation that she was a Russian agent, which is a story that was absolutely fake from the beginning. It coincides with stuff we found on the Twitter files. Like, one of the sources in that story were the same people who were behind the Hamilton 68 stuff. That story was totally invented, and that was infuriating. Then there's the whole business with the TSA and that stuff. So her anger on this is, I'm actually surprised that she is as restrained as she was in her public appearances. But yeah, my sense of her is that she's genuine, and that her emotional reaction to all this is real. So let's hope, right? We have no idea, but I do think that they have a winning hand, and there's a way to lose it heading into the next administration.
I think there's only one way to lose it, and that's not to get any results. And I think Trump knows it.
That's true too.
And I think that this posturing that we're seeing now is, part of as I say, negotiation, a poker game. It's like before a fight, I'm going to kick your ass, but
right, with everybody holding each other back, that whole thing.
Yeah. It also creates interest. He's up against the world's biggest murder mystery of the world's biggest corporate villain. He's got to get headlines somehow. He's got to get attention. My last thing on this, sort of to tie together the themes of what I've been talking about all together tonight, from Maddow to the murder mystery. to Weissman, pretending that something's coming in a deceptive way so that, his clients who have apparently consciousness of guilt or at least vulnerability to prosecution can have a story about why they get pardoned for nothing.
Right. No crime. Nothing on God's green earth. No suggestion.
Think of what your job is when you know your client's going to get pardoned, and they're not going to stipulate a crime, and you've got to keep people from wondering if there was one. Well,
right.
You say the only thing you can say is, we fear something bad will be done to us. He didn't commit any crimes, but we fear ones will be made up.
Yeah. And that we'll be convicted of these non-existent crimes.
Right. It's like,
somehow.
It's like me saying, I won't, I refuse to go to the principal's office. Why? What are you afraid of? Because I know he hates me and he'll make something up about me.
Right.
That's about all they can do.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. And that's a great observation. I think just sort of my last thing, for this period, we started off talking about these crazy news stories that seem either fake or to have fake responses to them, and that there's an attempt to kind of dominate the news space with invented or manipulated narratives and all this stuff. And this has been our reality for the last 8 years, and it's so exhausting, and it's gotten to the point where it's going to scramble, or it scrambles your brains to even try to follow it. Part of the reason it's frustrating is because I'm already hearing about what's coming in terms of some of the releases. And as you say, it's going to be the DC files. These are going to be explosive revelations that are coming down the pike. And that is going to be real news of a type that we probably haven't seen since, maybe the church committee hearings, when we heard all that crazy shit about, trying to kill Castro with an exploding seashell and, wiretapping Martin Luther King. It's going to be stuff on the order of that.
Yes.
That is, America's going to be shocked by, frankly. And that's going to be reality.
Exactly. That is going to be a reality. And for a real investigative reporter like you, see, I'm as a novelist, I'm interested in how the game is played, how the stories are structured, how the characters are introduced, and so on. But you have hound dog thirst for the bottom line truth layer on these stories, while I sit up here telling you how they're kind of constructed, how they're partly real and partly fake, and so on. But I do have that same bloodhound in me too, underneath this. And I really want to see this stuff. And I see a way in which manipulating the news space, or flooding it, or distracting people, or getting them engrossed in other kinds of narratives is a real proof, and something that people would do when they know the bodies are about to get dug up.
Right. And that's one of the only things that makes all this other stuff make sense, is the anticipation of
the timing.
A big dose of shocking reality is about to come, and
because
that
Matt,
makes all this behavior make sense.
How do you know what's coming? You've been told.
Yes, a little bit.
And you've been told by people who know more than you do.
Oh yeah.
So they really know what's coming. And if it's shocking you a little bit, and if you're wondering, can America handle it, or how are they going to process some of this stuff, that's really been thought about by people who already know. You see, people go, Walter, you're crazy. You're saying that this murder mystery, even though I'm acknowledging that there was a murder there, is kind of a war, half War of the Worlds, half O.J. Simpson, half COVID story. And it would take a lot of people and a lot of effort to mount it. But if you see what the motive might be, the motive to create a story and sort of suck up all the space in that way is what they know is coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, it'll have this effect on, you know, the part of our society that's kind of been manipulated in the last decade or so. I mean, I remember reading Hunter Thompson interviewing somebody during the Watergate hearings who was saying, I guess who was a Nixon voter, saying, God, this shit is horrible. Like listening to it every day, it's like finding out your old lady's running around with somebody. And I think that, you know, things like COVID origins, what the intelligence agencies were actually saying to each other, you know, during those periods. I mean, that's just one of 100 different things that they can get into. They start holding hearings on that stuff, and it starts coming out in big doses. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to be quickly disabused of some illusions that they've. I'm hoping that's what happens anyway. So that's
what we're seeing now in this transition phase on all fronts, as far as I'm concerned, is people trying to proof themselves against the future and get things done that they don't think they'll be able to do in the future.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those are the keys. Do I have all the phenomena and all the players and what's exaggeration and what's not and what's real and what's spin? Do I have all that? No, I can't specify, but I can tell you that in general, what this all looks like is a defensive action by people with knowledge of culpability and some awareness of what's coming, using the last moments they have in foreign policy and peace and war and in domestic affairs and in the media space to defend themselves or
and frame what's coming
and frame what's coming.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying. In the end, people can nail me on the details. I'm not invested in the details. I'm trying to understand why all this energy is going into things like, you know, regime change in Syria, why all this sudden last minute money is going out to Ukraine, why
we didn't even get into that. I mean, that's how crazy this period is that we can't even. That's like the number 8 event of the last 4 or 5 days is that we threw more money at the Ukraine war. But anyway,
Biden just called for massive aid to Syria to help them, you know, I don't know, establish democratic institutions. I don't know,
or non-democratic institutions, whatever.
Right. So he's already spending Trump's money, basically.
Yeah. No, it's crazy, but it's fascinating. This is all going to be fascinating. I mean, we spent all this time trying to, you know, crawl all the way up the mountain just to get a glimpse of little things like pre-bunking or how the censorship stuff worked. And I think what you're talking about, we're going to learn a lot more about how these narrative strategies intersect with, you know, some of the actual corruption that's taken place. I mean, I think what I'm interested in is going to intersect with what you're talking about.
You're coming at it from underneath, from the facts layer, and I'm coming down from it from the clouds, from like it's all a movie layer. And in some ways, your way is good, but also limited because it's what they add to the facts nowadays. You know, what they call the spin and the commentary and the trending stuff that sort of makes the story. And my way is limited too, because I can't really see down to the fact, but I can see the behavior. I know when people have a body buried in the yard and they're trying to distract me from it, but I don't know where the body is.
Yeah. Yep. Well, we're about to find out, I think. Hopefully. It's like the end of season 4 of The Wire. We're going to find where Marlo put all those bodies. So anyway, Walter, thanks a lot for hanging out. Thanks everybody for coming out. And we will see you again later this week.
See you then.
Sayonara, folks. Thanks a lot.